What is the difference? Because last night's speech, I think even people on the left would say had some great moments. What's the difference between teleprompter Trump and Twitter Trump?
Well, I mean, I think Twitter Trump is when he feels undefended and he's watching the news cycle from inside the White House and he gets upset and he feels like he doesn't have media advocates out there defending him. He'll start firing off tweets that I would say are non-strategic. I mean, they're distracting from his message. But
well, that's it.
That's Twitter Trump. But last night is vintage strategic Trump, because what he's looking at right now is a setup for the 2020 reelect, and he knows he's got to come into the game holding on to his base, but also reaching out to moderates. And that speech was the lodestar for the reelection.
Was that his first campaign speech, Anthony?
In some ways, it was a policy speech too, but in some ways, I think it really was. At the end of the day, that's been the president's core message that got him elected. But what happens is when you get to Washington, as a senator, you go into this big, huge chasm of divide, and you start shooting peas at each other. But in order to get reelected, the president knows he's got to get to those moderates. But what I think is very important for people to understand, the shutdown was related to holding on to that base. Remember, the base has to vote for the president in 2020. They're not going to vote for the Democrat, but you got to get them to turn out at the polls, and so he has to show those people that he's fighting for them. And I think people missed that in the strategic calculation of shutting down the government. And so now he's in a good spot.
Does talking about compromise mean, though, that he is going to compromise? I mean, in order to hold on to the base, does he need to hold on to the notion of $5.7 billion or close to that for the border wall? Because there wasn't any indication as to what he would give up, what he might soften his stance on in exchange for that.
So I personally don't think so. I think when he can go to his base now and say, hey, listen, shut the government down for 35 days. I'm doing the best I can. The opposition, you see how difficult they are. You see how hard it is for me to work for them. I need you to turn out. I need you to turn out and vote in more Republican senators, more House of Representative candidates as well, so we can really take this to the next level in the next 4-year electoral cycle. Had he not shut the government, and Ann Coulter and some of those people on the right disavowing him, I think it hurts him as it relates to voter participation. I think that was the core critical strategic move that he made over the last 35 days.
Another way it seemed like a setup to 2020 is setting the premise that we have an economic boom and also putting the stuff out there of what might interrupt that, right? So if we're in 2020 and the economy doesn't feel as great, he can either A, say, I told Jay Powell he shouldn't have raised rates as fast as he did. He might have gone too far already. And two, investigations, distractions, kind of dimming the mood of the country. It seems like that's also kind of setting up an argument for 2020.
Yeah, again, all those things I agree with, Michael. And then he literally, I think him and his speechwriter said, okay, let's pick 3 or 4 things that if you're an American, forget about if you're a Democrat or a Republican, you're going to cheer about. Okay, the moon landing, the D-Day invasion, cancer survivors, children that have been saved. How about prison reform? That was a key bipartisan moment for him.
So, Anthony, the president said you can't have legislation and investigations. But there are going to be investigations in the House of Representatives, not my old body, the Senate, because Mitch McConnell's still in charge there. Does the president have the ability to compartmentalize? Bill Clinton was investigated during the whole Monica Lewinsky episode, but kind of put that over here and focused on governing over here. The president needs some wins going into the reelect, as you pointed out. Can he compromise? Can he compartmentalize the investigations, or is that just going to send him over the edge with constant tweets?
Senator, I think he can. I mean, he survived 3 or 4 bankruptcies in his corporate life. He survived the ups and downs, trials and tribulations of the campaign. And I think he's frustrated by the investigations. And some of the investigations are legitimate. Those are mostly the ones that have nothing to do with him. I think he's just frustrated about the Russian situation. Again, I remember it was only 11 days in the White House, so I was 9 months on the campaign. I was 12 weeks on the presidential transition team, had a pretty senior role. I didn't see any Russian collusion. I don't think the president colluded with Russia. And so let's get that piece of the investigation behind us. These other investigations, the things that are going on with the indictments, they don't seem that they're causally related and deeply connected to the president. But I think he can. I think he's capable of compartmentalizing. Most great politicians are.
You know, Senator Bayh, we saw last night there was some squirming going on when he said many of the people in this room voted for a $46 billion basically wall border security bill in the past. Now they won't give me, let's call it $6 billion, some uncomfortable stuff. In the age of social media, in the age of the 24/7 news cycle, are we going to have any bipartisanship at all? Because if somebody dares step across the aisle on a big thing they're going to get eviscerated by their own party, are they not?
Well, there's that risk, and that's one of the reasons that they're so reluctant to compromise. Many of them are afraid of a primary challenge. So we'll get more statesmanship and more compromising when the American people insist on it. When they say, look, we've had enough of this partisanship, we've had enough of this brain-dead ideology, we want results. And when they start rewarding politicians who are willing to be brave enough to take on some of the radicals and get things done.
I have a crazy idea, and then I want you to answer then Anthony to you, which is this. I'm not in favor of more new laws, but how about a law that says we can't pass any laws without at least one law about laws?
Yeah.
You did go to Harvard.
You sounds really smart. Go ahead.
Let me finish
So
there,
no, I'm
Ms.
sorry. Finish.
Ms. Lee.
Go ahead.
This
Sorry
isn't
for
power
my
lunch.
skepticism.
All right, let's talk about this. Can't pass any law without at least one vote from the other party. So we don't get the 51 to nothings. We don't get the this to zeros. Would that work? Is that reasonable?
Well, in the Senate, you got to get to 60 votes, so it's more than just one. You got to overcome filibusters. There was something, Brian, a couple of years ago where they said we weren't getting any budgets. And so they said, well, if you don't get a budget passed, you won't get paid. Well, guess what happened the next year? A budget got passed. So I'd go more toward the pocketbook than requiring a single vote.
You change the incentives, you're gonna change the way things happen. I mean, listen, the gerrymandering obviously is keeping these people polarized, and so that's a very big issue for the United States. Universal voting, like they have in Australia, you did that, you start liquidating the extremists in the body politic. But I think the key thing for today, because it's the day after the State of the Union, did the president do a good job, yes or no? I think decidedly he did a great job last night. Is he going to compromise? I think he is. I think he is the type of person where, he made that comment that he could shoot people on Fifth Avenue. His base is not going to leave. I think he's now proven to his base that he's with them. And so a couple of compromises here on the way into the re-elect is probably the right strategy. And I think he took that strategy last night.
So you're in the hedge fund business. A year ago, the backdrop in terms of the outlook for the economy and the stock market was very different compared to today. And so I'm wondering how you see that president playing into how the stock market will do this year.
So, I mean, just as that backdrop, the market was down 5, Skybridge was up 3.5 last year. So we put ourselves in a very defensive position as it related to, structured credit. Market down 4.5, whatever the right number is. But we put ourselves in a very defensive position. I think the market's going to be fine this year. Coming out of Davos, Switzerland, the 3,500 elites up there were decidedly grim. That's usually a very good counter indicator of where the markets are going to be. So economy will probably be 2.5%, 3% growth, and at a 14, 15 multiple for this year's numbers, I think it's pretty good.